brothers, Brother Osmond, Brother Zachary, Brother Dominic, Brother Stephen, came around and talked to you. They wanted to know, who are you? You know, who are you? Let me tell you who I am. Well, what do you do? Here's what I do. It was a joyful place. It was a wonderful place. And even though we were only there for 2 days, when on Monday morning it was time to say goodbye, and Brother Stephen and Brother Zachary walked out with us to our taxi, which was waiting to take us to the train, I suddenly had the feeling I was leaving home. I felt so sad. I felt like I was going out into the cruel world. Why was this? You know, I couldn't figure it out, having been there such a short time. And then somewhere along the line, maybe that day, maybe the next day, I realized this is a Benedictine monastery. And they follow the rules of St. Benedict. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things, but as a guest, Rule 53, there are 73 rules. Rule 53 is for the reception of guests. And here it is. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. You see, when we were welcomed as though we were Christ himself. That's quite an experience. No wonder I felt like I was going out into the cruel world. For he himself will say, was a stranger, and you welcomed me. But the Benedictine monks took this vow. They took this seriously. This was who Christ was for them. When Christ said, who do you say that I am? This was one of the things that Christ was for them. Christ was the one who said, welcome strangers. Welcome them as though they are me, because they are me. Welcome sojourners, welcome pilgrims. Feed people who need to be fed. This is who Christ was for them. Now, who is this Christ that Peter first proclaimed? The first time I had even an inkling about this, even though I had grown up in the church, it was in the Bible study, and I think Janice and Austin may be the only people here besides me that were in that Bible study. But I remember sitting in the lounge and we were talking, reading the Gospel according to St. John. We just started, it was newly formed. You know, I should have known who this Christ was. I believed in God. I truly did. But I didn't know Christ because I had never, ever met him. And I remember we read from the first chapter of John, and I realized, you know, the reason I didn't know Christ, didn't know God, was because I had always dressed up in my best finery to come to church. I've never been honest. I've never actually met Christ or God as someone who would get to know me. I was pretending things were fine. Yeah, things are fine. So that evening, first chapter of John, of course you're all familiar with it. It's a great chapter, one of the best. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of humanity. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And we skip down a few verses and read, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. You know, I love the translation of this last verse from the Message, which is a translation by a pastor named Eugene Peterson. Here's what it is. The Word became a human being and moved into the neighborhood. What has happened to the neighborhood? Uh-oh. This is something really unusual. This is something out of this world. You see, Christ does not live in heaven. Christ lives in the neighborhood. I mean, he is in heaven too, I suppose, but he is among us. Christ walks among us. He's living. That's the story of the incarnation, of the resurrection. The Word became a human being and moved into the neighborhood, like Father, like Son, generous, inside and out, true from start to finish. We need to remember that. Generous. When we meet Jesus Christ for the first time, or for the 1 millionth time, become forever changed. It's as though we're going one direction, decide we need to turn around and go another way. It's all of a sudden like what we wanted before wasn't important, we want something else. It's all of a sudden we go on a business trip and we think, oh, why am I on this business trip? I need to be on another one. What was on our left now is on our right. What was on our right is now on our left. This happened in the early 1900s to a man named Albert Schweitzer. Now, raise your hand if you know who. Everybody my age and over has to know Albert Schweitzer, correct? He was in the Weekly Reader. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, the Weekly Reader, I heard it just went out of print, but we used to read the Weekly Reader every Friday, and there were stories about Albert Schweitzer. If you don't know him, I'm going to tell you who he was. He was a biblical scholar. He was probably the foremost authority on Johann Sebastian Bach. He was an organist who went around and played Bach, what do you call them, concertos, or what would you call them, Judy? Is that a good word? Okay. And he was also a theologian. I mean, this man did not lack for knowledge or college degrees. But one day, Albert Schweitzer, who was actually a huge man, very large, not big, but tall, and had long arms, and when he got older, he had lots of white hair, a mustache. Anyway, he was glancing at an article in the Paris Missionary Society. This was early 1900s. And he read that they needed doctors in Africa. So he said, okay, this is what I must do. Well, everybody thought he was crazy. You see, he wasn't a doctor. He said, well, I'm going to go back to school, go back to the university and earn his medical degree. And with a specialty in tropical diseases, he convinced his fiancée, who was to become his wife, Helene, to join him. They raised funds, went to French Equatorial Africa, which is modern-day Gabon, and built a hospital from scratch, right there on the side. You know, he spent his whole life there. The only time he traveled was to give organ recitals, and all the money he earned went back into the hospital. He earned the Nobel Peace Prize. All the money he earned went back into the hospital. He lived to the age of 90, and he finally died in his hospital in Africa. You know, nobody knew, nobody understood why. Not even the Paris Missionary Society who wrote the article. They couldn't figure out what he was doing. They were a bit worried that maybe, not quite right. But here's what he said when asked. Jesus told him to. This learned, educated man with multiple degrees, multiple talents said, Jesus told me to. He's got some words written in our own hymnal on page 89. Christ comes to us as one unknown, without a name, as of old on the lakeside. He comes to those who knew him not. He speaks to us the same word, follow thou me, and sets us to the tasks which he has to fulfill in our time. He commands, and to those who obey him, whether they be wise or simple, he will reveal himself in the toils, the comforts, the sufferings, which they shall pass through in his fellowship. And as an ineffable mystery, they shall learn in their own experience who he is. My favorite theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said that God is the beyond in the midst of our lives. We learn about God in the middle of the village. That's where God is. That's where God is working. For Albert Schweitzer, Christ says, who do you say that I am? And Albert Schweitzer said, you are the divine mystery to be heard and to be obeyed. We ask, who are you, Christ? And Christ says, who do you say that I am? Now, I recall a lady by the name of Katie. I only met her twice. I was serving up in South Bend at the church up there, and I met her twice before I presided at her funeral. The first time I met her, it was in her hospital room at St. Joe Hospital in South Bend. Her son Rex asked me if I would look in on her. I'd never met her. I hadn't been there long. And I said, sure. I walked into her room, and instead of what I